The chains whispered against Bellatrix's skin like mechanical serpents, each link forged from quantum-tempered durasteel that caught the harsh cell lighting and fractured it into silver fragments across the walls. 300 pounds of restraints. She counted them in heartbeats, in the rhythm of her breathing, in the slow burn of muscle memory that remembered the weight of Earth's gravity like a lover's touch. 28 years of deathworld evolution had carved her from stone and flame. Her body held secrets that civilized species had forgotten in their climb toward the stars. How muscle could become weapon, how bone could become armor, how the human heart could beat steady rhythms while everything else burned. The facility's artificial gravity pressed against her like water, thick and yielding, when it should have crushed her into submission. She flexed against the restraints. Metal strained, crystalline lattices designed by galactic engineers, who had never felt the kiss of 3 times gravity or breathed air that tasted of iron and struggle. The sound echoed through corridors built to amplify fear, to announce when prey moved, when predators stirred. But Bellatrix had learned something in the depths of Earth's endless appetite for survival. The difference between predator and prey often came down to a single moment of choice. She closed her eyes, felt the facility's mechanical heartbeat through the walls. Atmospheric processors cycling recycled air that carried the metallic scent of violence and the chemical signatures of alien desperation. In the darkness behind her lids, she could map the structure around her. Corridor layouts burning bright as star charts, defensive positions marking themselves like navigation beacons, the rhythm of alien footsteps approaching with hunting pack precision. The Korath Detention Center turned in its endless orbit, a steel flower blooming in the void. Through her cell's narrow viewport, stars wheeled past in patterns that spoke of distances beyond human comprehension, of worlds where other species had learned different lessons about survival. Here, in this floating tomb, gravity bent to alien whims and hope came to die. But not today. She opened her eyes and chose. The chains snapped like dying stars, quantum-tempered durasteel parting with sounds that spoke of stellar collapse and planetary birth. 300 pounds of galactic engineering crashed to the cell floor, anchor bolts torn from mountings designed to contain fusion reactor cores. The metal sang as it fell, a brief aria of liberation that ended in silence, so profound it seemed to press against her eardrums. Bellatrix rose, unfolding like a blade from its sheath. 6 feet of concentrated purpose, muscles dense as neutron star material, eyes that held the cold light of space itself. Her skin bore the subtle patterns of deathworld adaptation, scars that told stories of crystalline predators in the forests of Vex Prime. Pressure marks from the crushing depths of Oceanus Rex, where water became solid and creatures lived in spaces between atoms. Each mark a lesson in survival that no galactic academy could teach. The energy barrier flickered around her like captured aurora, bioelectric fields designed for predictable alien signatures. Clean alien thoughts, civilized alien dreams. But human consciousness burned different frequencies, wild spectrums that touched ranges no galactic engineer had mapped, wavelengths that spoke of worlds where fire and ice danced together in the darkness between suns. She stepped through the barrier as if it were colored mist. Alarms shrieked through the facility's nervous system, emergency lighting bathing everything in arterial red that painted the corridor walls like the inside of some vast, mechanical heart. The passage stretched before her like the throat of a sleeping giant, lined with cells that held the galaxy's darkest nightmares. Threat assessment markers climbed into classifications that existed only in military intelligence whispers, numbers that spoke of beings who had rewritten the definitions of dangerous. But Bellatrix had learned to walk with monsters long before she'd ever seen a star. The sound came first, footsteps approaching with the measured cadence of hunting pack algorithms, each step calculated for optimal approach vectors and maximum psychological impact. The Nexari. She'd watched them work during her tour with the expeditionary forces, witnessed their cold efficiency on contested worlds where hope went to die. Pack hunters who'd evolved in low-gravity caves, bodies stretched like pulled taffy, minds sharp as surgical steel, and twice as merciless. The air itself seemed to thicken as they approached, carrying pheromone traces that spoke of predatory anticipation and the ozone scent of energy weapons charging. Her skin prickled with the static discharge of alien bioelectric fields, while her inner ear registered the subsonic frequencies they used for pack coordination. Every sense her species had evolved for tracking danger in Earth's endless crucible now sang with information. 3 figures materialized from the corridor's crimson shadows, elongated phantoms whose skin held the pale luminescence of deep places where starlight never touched. Their eyes reflected the emergency lighting with predatory mathematics, calculating distances and vectors, and the precise moment when death would arrive. Each movement carried the fluid grace of apex evolution, joints articulating in ways that human anatomy couldn't match. The leader stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of worlds that had never known warm suns or gentle rains. Welcome to Korath, human. I am the Xmoran of the Nexari Collective. Standard pack formation. Classic corridor warfare tactics. Bellatrix studied their positioning with the same attention she'd once given to crystal predators, whose refractive camouflage could bend light itself into weapon forms. How they moved, each step a calculated advance that maintained optimal firing angles. How they breathed, respiratory patterns that indicated combat readiness and psychological assessment protocols. How they thought death would come, assuming superior numbers and coordinated strikes would overcome individual resistance. They had never hunted a deathworlder. You've been assigned to Block 7, the Xmoran continued, elongated fingers tracing patterns on empty air that left faint phosphorescent trails. Nexari territory. We maintain order through cooperation and shared strength. The words fell through translation matrices that stripped away the menace, but couldn't quite hide the promise of violence underneath. Bellatrix heard the subtext in the harmonic overtones, the way pack psychology shaped every syllable. Cooperation meant submission. Shared strength meant the collective feeding on individual weakness, until nothing remained but hollow shells pretending to be alive. Your species has no representation in this facility. No pack bonds, no tribal connections. You are alone. The words fell into silence like stones into deep water, each one carrying weight beyond mere sound. Alone, as if isolation were weakness rather than freedom. As if humans hadn't spent millennia learning that sometimes the pack was what you ran from, not toward. As if Earth hadn't taught its children that the most dangerous predator was often the one who hunted without need for others. Bellatrix looked into the Xmoran's reflective eyes and saw her own image fractured into 1,000 pieces, each fragment showing a different angle of the same truth. She was alone. She was dangerous. She was exactly where she needed to be. The facility's atmospheric processors hummed a mechanical lullaby in the walls around them, cycling air that tasted of industrial lubricants and the copper tang of dried blood. Somewhere in the superstructure, power conduits carried energy that could light small cities, while gravity generators bent spacetime itself to create the illusion of down in a universe that recognized no such direction. All of it designed to contain, to control, to reduce the galaxy's most dangerous beings to manageable variables in some vast equation of suffering. But they had miscalculated one crucial factor. Perhaps you fail to understand your situation, human. This is not a military prison where species boundaries are maintained through administrative separation. Here, survival requires alliance, protection, understanding. The Nexari leader tilted his head, studying her silence with growing irritation that manifested as subtle changes in his bioelectric field. His packmates shifted position, movements so small they barely registered on conscious awareness, but her peripheral vision caught them anyway. Micro-adjustments in stance that spoke of violence held in careful suspension, like energy building toward inevitable discharge. What say you, human? Will you accept Nexari protection, our guidance in these dangerous waters? Bellatrix felt her muscles align with the biomechanical efficiency that her species had learned in the crucible of Earth's endless appetite for survival. Tendons and ligaments finding the perfect harmony, bones settling into configurations that could channel forces beyond normal physical limits. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropping into combat rhythm, while her consciousness expanded to encompass every detail of the environment around her. The texture of recycled air against her skin, the way emergency lighting cast shifting shadows that could conceal movement or create false targets. The precise distance to each alien calculated not in meters, but in heartbeats, in the time it would take to close gaps and apply leverages that their evolutionary history had never prepared them to resist. She'd endured the pressure depths of Oceanus Rex, where water became solid and creatures lived in spaces between atoms. She'd walked the crystal forests where silicon dreams took on hunger and teeth. This floating cage held no surprises that could compare to the lessons Earth had written into her bones. She smiled. The expression seemed to unsettle the Xmoran more than her silence had. Humans smiled before violence, the way other species bared fangs before feeding. It meant the same thing, but carried implications that civilized minds couldn't quite process. There was something in that upward curve of lips that spoke of predatory joy, of the deep satisfaction that came from being exactly what evolution had designed you to be. "I appreciate the offer," she said, her voice carrying across the emergency-lit corridor like music from a distant world. "But I think I'll handle this myself." The silence that followed held weight beyond mere absence of sound. It pressed against alien consciousness like gravity, heavy with implications that pack-hunting psychology couldn't parse. Independent action, solitary survival, concepts that violated everything the Nexari understood about civilization and strength, about the fundamental necessity of collective security in a universe that wanted to kill everything that moved. Heavy footsteps echoed from multiple directions as other inmates responded to the facility's distress calls, the rhythm speaking of massive frames moving with purpose, of predators awakening from patient slumber. Emergency lighting cast everything in geometric shadows that shifted like living things as figures approached from the corridor's depths, their movements creating pressure waves that human ears could track with hunting-born precision. The Thakron arrived first, their approach announced by the grinding vibration of bone-dense footsteps that seemed to shake the facility's superstructure. 9 feet of evolutionary perfection, bodies forged under crushing gravity that made Earth seem gentle by comparison. Their leader's voice rumbled like geological movement, subsonic frequencies that the translation matrix struggled to process into recognizable language. The human walks free. Interesting. Behind them came the Kordakari, their movements precise as clockwork as servomotors whined in cybernetic limbs that had replaced flesh with quantum-processed efficiency. Their leader showed more mechanical modification than organic tissue, consciousness housed in frameworks of synthetic neural pathways that computed violence with mathematical precision. Emotion filtered through probability matrices that reduced all interaction to optimal outcome scenarios. Species designation verified. Threat assessment requires recalibration. The corridor filled with representatives from species whose names carried weight in the darkest corners of galactic space, each faction maintaining careful distance, while evaluating this unexpected variable in their carefully balanced equations of power and survival. Territorial boundaries that had been drawn in blood and negotiation suddenly became fluid, uncertain, as fundamental assumptions about galactic hierarchy shifted beneath their feet. Bellatrix found herself at the epicenter of forces that had taken decades to achieve equilibrium. Power structures built on fear and mutual assured destruction. Species-specific advantages leveraged through careful diplomacy and measured applications of violence. All of it suddenly unstable because one human had chosen to stand alone rather than kneel with the collective. She walked forward, each step carrying the casual confidence of an apex predator, moving through familiar territory. The assembled aliens tracked her movement with expressions that ranged from fascination to hunger, but none moved to intercept. Not yet. They were still calculating, still processing this new data through neural networks that had never encountered a variable quite like her. A voice called out from one of the nearby cells, cutting through the tense atmosphere with the guttural accent of desert winds and distant battles. A Koran, his scaled hide bearing scars that spoke of conflicts that had reshaped star systems, of battles fought in the spaces between worlds, where only the strongest survived to tell their stories. You seek alliance. I offer knowledge in exchange for consideration. Bellatrix paused before his energy barrier, studying the massive alien with the same attention she would give any potential threat. 8 feet of predatory evolution, claws that could part battleship armor, jaw structure designed for crushing vehicle chassis. But something in his bearing spoke of intelligence that transcended mere physical prowess, the careful calculation of a mind that understood war as both art and science. The power structures here operate on principles your species may not understand. The Koran continued, his voice carrying harmonic undertones that spoke of vast spaces and endless horizons, dominance through display rather than direct action, psychological warfare rather than physical confrontation. The strongest do not always rule. Around her, faction leaders exchanged glances that carried entire conversations in their depths, alien psychology processing information through channels that human minds could barely comprehend. The prison's hierarchy had evolved through careful balance, each species carving territory through methods that reflected their evolutionary advantages. But none had prepared for a predator that operated outside their fundamental assumptions about survival. The Xmoran stepped forward again, his pack reforming behind him with weapons drawn from concealed positions. Energy rifles designed to stop normal galactic physiology, ammunition that could pierce standard defensive systems, tools that had served them well in maintaining their position in the facility's ecosystem, weapons that had written their names in the hierarchy through careful application of overwhelming force. You have demonstrated strength, human, but strength without direction is merely chaos. Join us and benefit from centuries of Nexari wisdom. The Thakron leader's laughter shook dust from the corridor ceiling, massive chest rising and falling with mirth that sounded like planetary storms. The sound echoed through the facility's superstructure, a deep bass note that seemed to resonate in human bones and make alien neural networks skip processing cycles. Wisdom. Your species cowers in shadows and strikes from ambush. We offer something more valuable. Respect earned through direct confrontation. Honor in battle. The Kordikari leader's cybernetic eyes focused with mechanical precision, quantum processors calculating optimal responses to this new variable in their carefully ordered universe. When he spoke, his voice carried electronic harmonics that bypassed organic vocal cords entirely, pure information transmitted through frequency modulation. Emotion is inefficient. Logic indicates optimal outcomes through technological integration. Our collective offers enhancement beyond biological limitations, 3 different paths to the same destination. Submission disguised as partnership. Strength channeled through hierarchy. Freedom traded for protection that always came with prices too high to pay. Each faction offering their own version of salvation while carefully avoiding mention of the chains that came with it. Bellatrix listened to their offers while studying the facility's architecture, noting sight lines and defensive positions that could be held by someone who understood that sometimes the best alliance was with empty space and silence. The prison's designers had built their maze assuming collective behavior, group dynamics, pack mentalities that valued shared risk over individual excellence. They hadn't planned for a species that had learned to thrive in isolation. The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken threats and calculated offers, pressure building like atmosphere before a storm. Emergency lighting flickered as the facility's systems processed stress beyond normal parameters. Power fluctuations that spoke of infrastructure pushed to its operational limits. Somewhere in the depths of Block 7, ancient intelligence stirred with what might have been anticipation or hunger. The silence stretched until it became something alive, crawling through the corridor like a predator seeking prey. Every alien present felt its weight, the uncomfortable realization that their carefully constructed paradigms of power might not apply to the figure standing calmly at their center. She was an equation they couldn't solve, a variable that refused to behave according to established parameters. Bellatrix breathed in the recycled air, tasting metal and ozone and the subtle pheromone traces of alien fear. Her skin registered minute changes in temperature and humidity, while her inner ear tracked the facility's gravitational variations with precision that made inertial guidance systems seem clumsy. Every sense her species had evolved for surviving on a world that treated existence as an ongoing examination in applied violence now fed her information about this floating cage and its inhabitants. The real test was about to begin. Alarms screamed through the facility's nervous system as energy barriers throughout the section began cycling down in sequence. Automated responses triggered by stress patterns that exceeded normal containment protocols. Inmates whose threat assessments exceeded safe parameters emerged from their cells like nightmares given form, each one representing apex evolution from worlds where physics bent different rules and survival meant becoming something more dangerous than the things that hunted you. A crystalline being that refracted light into weapon spectra stepped into the corridor, its form shifting through states that defied easy classification. Behind it came something that might have been living plasma, consciousness housed in electromagnetic fields that existed in the spaces between matter and energy. A serpentine form that measured 20 feet from head to tail uncoiled from its cell, movements suggesting patience that spanned geological timescales. They moved toward Bellatrix's position with predatory purpose, drawn by instincts older than star formation, by the primal recognition that equilibrium had been disturbed and nature demanded response. The facility's delicate ecosystem of violence had been disrupted, and the universe itself seemed to lean in with anticipation. But as the first alien reached striking distance, the crystalline being whose refractive camouflage could bend light itself into cutting edges, Bellatrix smiled again. The expression held promises that went beyond mere physical confrontation, spoke of lessons learned in crucibles where failure meant extinction, where survival required becoming something more terrible than the things that wanted to devour you. The crystalline entity attacked first, its form refracting emergency, lighting into patterns that could blind most species, silicon-based weaponry that could shatter organic tissue on contact, movements too fast for normal reflexes to track, strikes that came from angles that three-dimensional thinking couldn't easily process. Bellatrix stepped aside like liquid mercury. Her response targeted the specific resonance frequency that destabilized crystalline matrix structures. Knowledge gained from surviving the silicon forests of Vex Prime, where mineral predators moved like living glass through formations that sang with deadly harmonics. The alien's harmonic scream filled the corridor as its form collapsed into component elements, light-refracting beauty becoming scattered debris in the space between heartbeats. The plasma entity struck next. Electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt electronic systems while delivering energy discharges that could stop galactic standard physiology. But human neural activity burned frequencies that plasma consciousness couldn't easily target. Wavelengths that spoke of evolution under stellar radiation and magnetic field fluctuations that would scramble most organic minds. Bellatrix's counterattack created feedback loops that destabilized its coherence matrix, turning its own energy against the quantum foundations that held it together. Arcs of liberated power struck the corridor walls as the alien's form scattered into dissipating charges. The smell of ozone and burned metal filling recycled air that suddenly tasted of victory and violence. Emergency lighting flickered from electromagnetic interference, while the facility's grounding systems struggled to absorb energies that had never been part of their design parameters. More aliens pressed forward, each bringing evolutionary advantages that had made them apex predators on their respective worlds. The serpentine form attacked with 20 feet of muscle, and scale moving at velocities that defied its apparent mass. Multiple eyes tracking her movement, while its coiled body unleashed kinetic energy that could crush vehicle chassis. A bone-plated entity whose interlocked armor created natural weapons, while providing protection against most forms of attack, pressed close behind. Pack-hunting instincts adapted for group coordination despite being isolated from its kind. They fell before Bellatrix's assault like trees before stellar wind, each death demonstrating capabilities that exceeded their understanding of human potential. Reflexes honed by deathworld survival, techniques developed against predators whose speed and power surpassed anything the galactic community had cataloged. Every lesson Earth had written into her bones now expressed itself in movements too fluid for alien perception to track. In applications of force that targeted structural weaknesses no galactic database had mapped. The corridor filled with silence broken only by the whisper of atmospheric processors and the distant hum of power systems straining under emergency protocols. Debris from fallen aliens reflected emergency lighting in patterns that painted abstract art across metal walls, creating a gallery of destruction that spoke to the galaxy's newest apex predator. Bellatrix stood at the scene's center, breathing controlled and posture indicating readiness for additional threats. Human physiology had evolved for sustained combat over extended periods. Cardiovascular systems designed to function under stress that would cripple most species. Her recent exertion barely registered against reserves, built through 28 years of surviving on a world that treated existence as an ongoing examination in applied violence. The surviving inmates watched from their cell doorways, alien features reflecting calculations that had suddenly become far more complex. Her demonstration had established new parameters for the facility's power dynamics, variables that their carefully constructed hierarchies couldn't easily process. Some showed expressions that might have been respect, others revealed hunger that spoke of predatory opportunity, while a few displayed the careful neutrality of beings who understood when fundamental paradigms had shifted. But the real test still waited. From the direction of Block 7, laughter echoed through hidden speakers with harmonics that suggested amusement, filtered through consciousness older than most civilizations. Ancient intelligence stirring with predatory satisfaction as carefully laid plans moved toward their inevitable conclusion. Pieces on a board game played across galactic distances, with stakes that transcended individual survival. The sound carried implications that made several aliens retreat deeper into their cells, while others pressed closer to their energy barriers, with expressions that spoke of anticipation and hunger. Whatever waited in the facility's deepest sections had been watching, calculating, preparing for this moment, when equilibrium would be tested against forces that operated outside established parameters. Time to discover what the warden had prepared for her arrival. Bellatrix walked toward the transport tubes that would carry her upward through the facility's superstructure, her footsteps silent on metal decking that showed the wear patterns of countless previous confrontations. Each step carried her deeper into whatever game the ancient intelligence was playing, toward answers that might explain why her presence here felt less like accident and more like invitation. The Koran prisoner called out as she passed, his voice carrying approval that transcended species boundaries. Impressive display, human, but this facility holds greater challenges than pack hunters and hive soldiers. Such as? She asked without slowing her pace, though her peripheral vision tracked his movements for signs of deception or threat. The warden, Jexcaller of the Mordain hegemony. He has ruled this place for 37 cycles, maintaining order through methods that would disturb even Thakron sensibilities. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, implications that suggested power structures operating on scales that individual violence couldn't touch. Bellatrix filed the information while continuing her steady progress toward whatever confrontation awaited her in the facility's upper reaches. The transport tube entrance appeared ahead, blast doors showing scoring from energy weapons and impact damage from kinetic projectiles. Access panels displayed authorization requirements that could be bypassed through various means, depending on technological familiarity and available resources. But the facility's emergency protocols had already granted her access, systems recognizing her prisoner status despite her current unauthorized mobility. What species? She asked the Koran, pausing at the transport controls while her enhanced hearing tracked approaching footsteps from multiple directions. Something older than the current galactic community, something that remembers when humans were still bound to their homeworld. The implications settled into her consciousness like stones into deep water, each one carrying weight that spoke of conflicts and alliances that predated humanity's emergence into galactic space. Ancient intelligence with historical perspective, minds that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations while learning the specific weaknesses that brought down apex predators. But they had never encountered a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history as apex predators on a world that specialized in creating them. "Thank you for the warning," she said, her hand finding the transport activation controls. "It was not a warning," the Koran corrected, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested satisfaction and anticipation in equal measure. It was a challenge. The transport tube cycled open with mechanical precision, revealing a vertical shaft that extended beyond visual range into darkness, punctuated by occasional maintenance lighting. Artificial gravity fields hummed with barely contained energy, ready to carry her upward toward whatever final examination awaited in Block 7's depths. She stepped inside, and the tube sealed behind her with the finality of a tomb closing. During the ascent, her mind processed tactical variables, while her body prepared for confrontation that would determine whether humans truly deserved their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The ride ended with mechanical precision that spoke of systems maintained beyond normal operational parameters. Doors cycled open to reveal a corridor that differed significantly from the lower sections. Emergency lighting here casting everything in blue-white illumination that suggested different atmospheric requirements. The air carried chemical signatures that spoke of alien metabolism and technological enhancement beyond normal galactic standards. Pheromone traces that indicated intelligence operating on scales that individual minds couldn't easily comprehend. Blast doors marked the entrance to Block 7, their surfaces showing impact damage that exceeded standard security specifications. Warning symbols indicated environmental hazards and containment protocols that applied to inmates, whose threat assessments climbed into classifications reserved for planetary-scale dangers. Beings whose very existence challenged the fundamental assumptions about what life could become. Beyond those doors waited Jexkeller, the ancient being whose laughter had echoed through her demonstration of human capabilities. The intelligence that had maintained order in this facility through methods that civilized minds preferred not to examine too closely. Whatever game was being played here, whatever purpose her presence served in calculations that spanned decades, the answers lay beyond those scarred and battered barriers. The doors cycled open with sounds like dying starships, revealing darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than simply exclude it. But Bellatrix had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators were often those that preferred shadows to illumination, that understood darkness as ally rather than enemy. She walked forward into the embrace of shadow, each step carrying her deeper into a confrontation that would determine not just her survival, but the future balance of power in humanity's expanding presence among the stars. Behind her, the facility's emergency systems continued their mechanical lullaby, while ahead, something ancient stirred with anticipation that had been building for 37 years. The final test was about to begin.